This is Wisconsin Archaeology Month. So it's kind of poignant for us to talk about a shipwreck, right? This is War Eagle is Wisconsin's only known river shipwreck, and it's a beloved shipwreck for Crosse. So I'm hoping to share with you this evening several new pieces of history that we've learned about in our historical research, as well as what we discovered from the archaeological examination of the shipwreck site. So we were able to list this site to the National Register of Historic Places 1 year ago. I'm having to admit people, so give me a second here. We had to, we were able to list this site to the National Register of Historic Places a year ago this week. It was approved. So we were trying to get it done for the 150th anniversary, but we'll celebrate for the 151st, right? So I want to tell you a little bit about how we got going on this project. Normally my office is funded through grants, and those grants are tied to the Great Lakes. So although the purview of our work is all submerged cultural resources in the state, it's we've been really limited to getting out much more than Lake Superior or Lake Michigan. But we 3 years ago, we received a donation from Elizabeth Uihlein from Uihlein Corporation, and we wanted to do something with it that we couldn't do with our normal funding. And so War Eagle had long been on our list of things that needed to be looked at. There had been a determination of eligibility for it. It needed additional archaeological work. And so we decided, well, let's see what we can do with this funding. And we can see if we can hire someone to do some remote sensing and to be able to look at the site see more than what divers could. So I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about that project towards the end of this presentation, but I'm going to start with the history, because part of the National Register nomination is doing an in-depth literature search and search of the history. So although you may have heard the story of the War Eagle, and I'm assuming that most of you have, this one may be just a little bit different than what you've heard before. So let me move on here. So, whoops, it's not letting me move, is it? There we go. Okay, so trying to get some people here. I'm double dutying it. I'm admitting people at the same time as this. All right. So, so one of the problems that we ended up having with the research is that we discovered in the 19th century, so 1850 to really the turn of the century, 1900, there were 3 river boats that carried the name War Eagle. So this made our historical research just a little bit more complicated. So I highlighted the War Eagle that's on the bottom of the Black River in black here so that you can see for the reference. But steamboat owners seem to have no trouble naming their ships after vessels with the same name and carrying those on. And War Eagle was really no exception to that. So the first War Eagle was built in 1845. And it was sold in 1846, dismantled and made into a barge in 1851. What's interesting about this, in comparing it with our War Eagle, is that it had the same owner and the same captain, and also traveled the same routes. So that made it a little bit more difficult to sort of suss out. But if we understand that it really stopped in that service before the War Eagle, Lacrosse's War Eagle, was built, that made it pretty easy to remove that one from our search. And I mean, it was a little bit shorter. It was 152 feet in length, 24 feet in beam, and a little bit shallower depth of hold, and of course a lot less in tonnage than the War Eagle that's now on the bottom of the Black River. The other ones that were very easy to discard in the research were the last two that we see here, the 1876 War Eagle and the 1899 War Eagle. These, of course, were built after the fire that and they were 4 different lines, although they served in the same routes. Those could pretty easily be discounted as well. But the one that was very difficult to sort of suss out from the history of the shipwreck that we're trying to tell is this 1858 one. We see that it was lost just a year before the War Eagle went to the bottom of the Black River, so pretty close in the time frame. It was also built very close to the same place. Fulton, Ohio is just east of Cincinnati. So, and in 1854, it was actually incorporated into the city of Cincinnati, so it became Cincinnati. So, so that made it a little difficult. We see the length is pretty close, you know, and the draft is negligible, but the capacity, the tonnage is very different. We see, you know, 297 tons for the War Eagle in La Crosse, and 446 tons for the other War Eagle. But the big difference is where its routes were. It served mostly on the Missouri River and on the lower Mississippi. But we also see some of its career on the Ohio River. So we don't see it really in this upper Mississippi where these other War Eagles were, and really where the War Eagle that's in La Crosse is. So that made it a little bit hard to sort out, but we worked our way through it. Go back to this. So our War Eagle again was built in Fulton, Ohio in 1854. She's lost in the Black River on the 15th of May, 1870. She was 220 foot long, 29 foot beam, 5 foot depth of hold, and the carrying capacity of 297 tons. So that's what we're looking at for when we're matching data, when we're going through historical research to try to sort out which one is which. So again, Fulton, Ohio is a village that's along the Ohio River, just to the east of Cincinnati. It occupies really this area that I've highlighted in red. And at the time in 1854, there were 3 shipbuilders in the community. There was John Litherbury, Samuel Hambleton, and the Cincinnati Marine Railway and Dry Dock Company, who did a lot of service work primarily. It's uncertain which one of those 3 builders was the builder of La Crosse's War Eagle. We were unable to locate any of the vessel enrollments. These are documents that you would use to register your ships, and it would be required to do when it changed owners or changed in service or capacity or was rebuilt. And we searched National Archives for a lot of that, and a lot of river boats just didn't have or weren't required to have enrollment documents this early in history. So I can make it go again. So when the War Eagle was constructed, she was built with 46 staterooms, and she was described as having the most modern improvements of the time, including a barber shop, velvet carpets, and other luxurious amenities. So the vessel was later praised for keeping on a very timely schedule and the service of its gentlemanly captain and officers. So it must have been quite a place to travel on. Very beautiful furnishings you see here, and very sort of plush inside. So the War Eagle also served under several different steamboat lines during its career, and this is a little bit of a misnomer, because it's really changes the name of these companies because of consolidations in the various lines. So we see first even before, as it's being built, it was built for Galena and St. Peter's, but during its build, that company merged with Minnesota Packet Company, and 1854 comes out as Galena and Minnesota Packing Company. So on its first season on the Mississippi River, it is under this company's flag. Then we see only 2 years later, they add the Dunleith in, so it's Galena, Dunleith, and Minnesota Packet Company. They were asked to, or they had requests to make stops at Dunleith. This is East Dubuque, if you're confused as to where that is. So across the river from Dubuque, and a lot of times they would also make stops in Dubuque itself. So that was added to the name of the company. And then another competitive line, which was called the Duluth and Minnesota Packet Company, consolidated with it. And 2 years later, they added the Dubuque to their name. So it became the Galena, Dubuque, Dunleith, and Minnesota Packet Company. So we get another 2 years sort of reprieve under that. And we see that Minnesota Packet Company and its most competitive line, the Northern Line, have so many ships that are running opposite each other that they make an agreement that only certain ships and certain lines will make certain ports on certain days. That way, that they could distribute some of the wealth of the market, and so. They actually are, their scheduling is done through the Northern Line, although they still remain part of the Minnesota Packet Company, or Galena, Dubuque, Dunleith, and Minnesota Packet Company. And it's going to become this troubling word for me to get out of my mouth, right? So this agreement continued to 1861, and in fact they didn't really keep, because this is the start of the Civil War, and so they really didn't keep to the this agreement in 61, but they see the rise of this company called the Davidson Line. And the Davidson Line starts competing with the two companies, and so they end up with a consolidation that happens with Davidson, and they turn the name into the La Crosse, Minnesota Steam Packet Company. And at this time, the War Eagle is on a route between La Crosse and St. Paul, and they run on this route for most of the Civil War, actually. So toward the end of the war, then Minnesota Packet Company actually dissolves, and Davidson buys out their share and turns the line into the Northwestern Union Packet Company. And most of the imagery that we see of the War Eagle comes from this time, and you see a lot of the names painted on the side with the Northwestern Union Packet Company around the wheel cover. Let's see if I can get back to the presentation. There you go. So again, most of the photos look of the War Eagle include that company name around the wheel, and or wheels. And another thing that you'll see that's very specific for this line is that they would have white collars that are around their smokestacks, and we see this here. And the company was sort of colloquially known as the white collar line, because of these collars that were around the smokestack. So they were a very unique look to their particular boats, and this was sort of a marketing thing, so that you'd know what kind of service you were getting, and who you were doing business with on the river, because there were quite a number of boats that were heavy competitors. So this is a little sticky part of the history that we had, and this is involving the Civil War history of the ship. So many historians accredit the War Eagle for involvement in frontline Civil War fighting. And maybe you've heard a number of those stories yourself. So we did a lot of digging in this area to try to find what the truth was. And we know that in 1861, after President Lincoln called for the troops at the beginning of the Civil War, Minnesota's 1st Regiment was one of the first to gather at Fort Snelling in St. Paul for training. And on the 22nd of June, 1861, they boarded 2 steamships. They boarded the War Eagle and the Northern Belle. And they took these from St. Paul to make railroad connections. So the Northern Belle took companies F, G, H, I, and K, along with Colonel Willis Gorman. And they took this down to Prairie du Chien, where they took the rail spur there. And then aboard the War Eagle was companies B, C, D, and E, along with Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Miller. And they connected with the La Crosse and Milwaukee Railroad. So both parties then came together at Janesville, and they continued on other rail lines, getting them to war. So we know that this is this is factual involvement of this War Eagle. But as far as the other stories that I've heard and retold, that's about as far as we can go as far as what the service was and service involvement of War Eagle was for this ship. We went ahead and explored some of the other claims. The first one was that the War Eagle joined the Steamboat Empress and 2 gunboats to carry Wisconsin's 1st Artillery and Indiana's 49th Regiment from St. Louis to Vicksburg. So this claim comes from a letter that was written by Lieutenant Daniel Webster of Wisconsin's 1st Artillery, and it details his journey. And it's always been assumed that since the letter is located in La Crosse and the author was from Wisconsin's 1st Artillery, and that there is a War Eagle that's sunk off La Crosse, that it's one and the same. But that's not the truth. So we went ahead and found an executive document that was published by the U.S. House of Representatives. And it was a list compiling vessels that were bought, sold, and chartered on Western rivers from 1861 to 1865. And in that publication, it lists a sidewheel steamboat named War Eagle that was chartered by the government from December 1862 to December 1863. The tonnage for that War Eagle in the document is listed at 424 tons. So this is quite excessive for the War Eagle in La Crosse, but it does closely match, not exactly, but closely match the tonnage for the 1858 War Eagle. So although it doesn't just point at that one and say that's the one it is very close. Tonnage on vessels was always measured and remeasured. So you see, even in Great Lakes vessels, where my experience is, that the tonnage will change over time, and the way that they measure the tonnage also changes. So it is plausible, or at least more plausible, that this vessel listed that's credited that document is actually that War Eagle that served served on the Missouri River primarily, but was built in 1858. The second claim for War Eagle and involvement in Civil War that we heard was that the War Eagle is associated with the movement of Wisconsin's 9th Infantry from Helena, Arkansas to Memphis, Tennessee between November 11th and 12th, 1863. And it was also involved with the transportation of the 8th Infantry from September 2nd through the 8th, 1864 on the White River in Arkansas. Again, we go back to the executive documents, and it actually lists the 428-ton War Eagle as chartered for both of those trips as well. So again, not associated with the War Eagle in La Crosse. And then the third the third association that we heard was that the War Eagle was attacked on the Tennessee River on March 11th, 1862, taking rebel fire while transporting troops and supplies from St. Louis to Savannah, Tennessee. So many of the soldiers suffered wounds, and the boat supposedly had a shot fired through its smokestack. Also, some of the provisions that were transported on the boat were stolen. We couldn't, this was not accounted for in the executive document. However, the Daily Union Appeal newspaper out of Memphis, Tennessee, lists the vessel as the New War Eagle. And that was typically how that 1856 or 58 War Eagle was represented in newsprint. So we believe that that ties it also to the 1858 War Eagle. Is not true for the War Eagle in La Crosse. So I need to change our historical marker that I made because I actually list that story as part of it. Oops. We all make mistakes, learn things when we do really in-depth history, right? Okay, so back to the sinking. So you heard the story of the sinking, so I'm going to recount that before I get into the archaeology a little bit more. On the 14th of May, 1870, the War Eagle arrived at La Crosse in the afternoon, and they were offloading passengers. And then around 6 o'clock in the evening, the boat traveled north of the city and onto the Black River to the Milwaukee Road Depot to meet the midnight train. So we can see in this 1867 bird's eye view of La Crosse, that train depot is over in the lower left-hand corner of this image. So that's what we're talking about and the location that we're looking at. Connection with various rail spurs is also really important when we're talking about these river vessels, these river boats of this era. You can see from this mid 1860 map of the railways that many of them didn't go much further than the Mississippi River. So the connection to the river boats and the timing with railway schedules was really important. I mean, we see some of the lines are short lines that are west of the Mississippi, but very few. And really connecting railway to steamboat service was really the only way for people and people wanting to access the Western frontier to get to these newly opened Dakota territories. So, so this was really important to note, is that it's not just the steamboat service that's keeping regular time, but they're very integrated with these rail schedules in order to meet the trains and to move the passengers and to move the freight in order to get them out to this developing Western frontier, but then also to get product that was being produced there back and onto those back onto the boats, onto the train cars to get to the larger and developed cities. So, so after the passengers, they met the train at midnight, and then the passengers came aboard the vessel, and the freight continued to be loaded onto the steamship. And as they were doing this, among the freight was barrels of kerosene oil or lamp oil. Also, we've heard it interchangeably called Danforth fluid and coal oil. It was discovered to be leaking, and those barrels had been loaded onto the port side of the vessel amidship, and upon loading them again, it was discovered to be leaking, and as was being repaired, it caught fire. Okay, so we have contradictory stories about how it caught fire depending on what you read. One account says that the cooper was tightening the bands started a spark, and his lamp fell over and caught the barrel on fire. Another account says that there was a boy walking past, and he was carrying a lamp, and the bottom of the lamp fell out, catching the barrel and the spilled oil on fire. Nonetheless, although it was non-explosive, it was highly flammable, and soon the barrel and all of the leaking oil had caught fire. So the crew tried to dispose of the barrel by rolling it off the port side of War Eagle, and to get rid of the danger of the flame, and to get it into the water to sort of douse that flame. Unfortunately, there was a barge called the Webb that was moored alongside the War Eagle, and as the barrel rolled off, it smashed onto the deck and it set that vessel on fire as well. So the fire alarm was sounded, and the fire alarm was sounded, and the passengers escaped by any means possible. Some of them managed to escape from the front gangplank. Others just jumped overboard into the river to escape the flames. The War Eagle was reportedly carrying 8 barrels of gunpowder in her bow. So it was really feared that that it would become a greater disaster. So fortunately, however, before the fire got to the bow of the ship, the vessel had sunk to its waterline and went down. And however, the flames were still going, and it spread to the railway depot, as well as a grain elevator, the main depot, warehouses and docks. Milwaukee and St. Paul Railway lost a passenger car, 6 freight cars, 1 express, 1 baggage car, and 1 mail car. The steamboats Keokuk and Molly Muller managed to gain enough speed to escape the flames. However, both of them sustained some damages. The damage estimates were over 200,000, and the Wisconsin State Journal published this list of monetary losses. So the St. Paul Railroad Company had insurance on their buildings of about $76,000, but the War Eagle was not insured at all. The passenger list was destroyed in the fire, but this made it difficult to determine the total number of lives that were lost. And I've heard varying numbers. I've heard 5, and I've heard 7. So I think that that's still a point of argument. We do know, however, that we know the name, well, we know a little bit about 5 of the people. We know there was a gentleman named Sanford McBrayer of Danville, Kentucky, who perished, a young girl named Mary Ulrich, a deckhand named James Green of Dubuque, the steamboat's barber, and an elderly woman who both went unnamed. So after the fire, a derrick was used to remove the War Eagle's paddle wheels and machinery. A portion of the vessel was pumped out and raised to the waterline. But on the 14th of July, 1870, the attempt ceased. The water level in the river had dropped so much that the remains of the shipwreck needed to be removed for navigational purposes. The chief engineer of the Army Corps of Engineers reported that the remains of the War Eagle needed to be removed from the navigational lane of the railway depot and into mid-water. So they removed it in September of 1874 all the way out to the center of the river. When Army Corps usually says removed, it doesn't mean that they're taking it out of the water. Usually that means that they're dragging it off and or dynamiting it, or a combination of both. So the Milwaukee and St. Paul Railway Company didn't waste any time in reconstructing a new Milwaukee Road depot. They started building actually on the same site only a week after the disaster. So you can understand the importance of the railway and its connection there at La Crosse, just by the speed at which they started reconstruction. And we see here in this 1873 bird's eye view that the Milwaukee Depot, Railway Depot, is fully reconstructed and open for business only a couple years later. In fact, it was only about a year later that they started receiving trains and moving passengers through the depot. So, okay, so now we're going to move on to the Archaeological Survey and disturbances that have happened on the site, and try to give you sort of an idea of what has happened there over the last 151 years. So it's had a number of disturbances. So we see dredging operations are occurring as early as 1897, when the Army Corps of Engineers was doing some dredging. In 1937, they dredged a 9-foot channel from the mouth of the Black River to a point 1.5 miles upstream. This is trying to deepen navigational channels. But they reported, when this project was done, they reported that only 87% of the project was complete before they ran out of funds, and they had to stop. And then in this dredging operation, they brought up artifacts from the War Eagle that came out in the pumps. We see in 1931 and 34, there were periods of extremely low water levels in the Mississippi and Black Rivers. This actually exposed large portions of the wreck, and people from town came out and climbed around on the shipwreck, and quite a bit of looting took place. People were rooting around in the mud and looking for artifacts then. Also, sometime in the 30s, the property changed hands to the Socony Vacuum Oil Company. They own the property immediately adjacent to the War Eagle site, and Mobil Oil later acquired the property, and they installed a dock that was extended out into the Black River that went over the War Eagle. They pounded pilings, are called dolphins, into the bottom to stabilize the dock. And we'll see in the Archaeological Survey that actually some of those dolphins go right through the middle of the shipwreck. They did this, they put this dock in actually in 39 to facilitate the barge use of their oil storage facility. Then we see in 1862 and 63 that the Winona County Historical Society funded a large-scale salvage expedition there to acquire artifacts. There had been rumors that there were thousands of dollars that were lost with the shipwreck. However, no chests of gold were found. This was one of the very first use of divers to do this excavation work on the shipwreck. The largest collection of artifacts is at the La Crosse County Historical Society. I'm sure many of you have seen it when it was available at the Riverside Museum, and I believe the collection has been relocated now. So then from the 1980s on, we see really a more focus on preservation of the site. In 1980, the State Historical Society listed War Eagle as an archaeological site. This discouraged diving, prohibited diving on the site. And only a few years later, based on a recollection that was reported in the newspaper, that some of the divers in the 1970s had excavated some human remains in a suction pump and then returned those remains to the bottom. The state decided to list the site as an official burial site. So this basically affects laws that protect the site and protect it from further looting or damage that occurs. So after that, then we start getting into our first archaeological surveys. So in 1985, the Army Corps of Engineers was asked, well, actually a plan was submitted by the Mississippi Docks Incorporated Company to install a barge facility around the War Eagle site. Because this isn't a navigable waterway, Army Corps of Engineers needs to do a review. And part of that is Section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act review to make sure that no historic properties are being adversely affected. And so in doing so, they took a look at the War Eagle site. They sent divers down. They did some survey of the bottoms, and they were able to map the depths of the channels there. And they altered the plan for that berthing facility to avoid the War Eagle site and further impact that dredging or boat traffic would cause to it. In doing so, and identifying this property, they did what was called a determination of eligibility. So basically, they asked the keeper of the National Register, so he's an employee of National Park Service, to review the potential for the shipwreck to meet the criteria for listing on the National Register. So it's a very it's sort of it says that there's something out there. We believe it has historic potential, but there's further archaeological study that will need to be done. In this archaeological survey that they did, which is a phase 1 archaeological survey, so basically they're just looking at what it is, they're not doing any dredging or excavation. They were going to do some remote sensing work, but the cost to hire someone in and to review the data was too cost prohibitive at that time, so they dropped that portion of it, and therefore they couldn't fully list the property on the National Register. They had to go with a determination of eligibility. We see the University of Wisconsin La Crosse coming in, Mississippi Valley Archaeological Center, and La Crosse, the La Crosse rescue squad working with them to try to take photos and to try to maybe you know, put a cofferdam around the site. There were all kinds of plans going around as to how do we survey the site to get that formal National Register listing. The UW La Crosse and the rescue team, we're going to just go out and take pictures. I've heard that there's good visibility there in the winter if you go in under ice, but I've never gone myself. And I think that even as much as they tried, they were not able to get any clear pictures because of the lack of clarity in the water. So that didn't really go very far. They had started a form for a National Register listing, MVAC had, to include sort of a larger site doing some land archaeology as well, and to look at it holistically as like the depot site and anything that had been bulldozed out into the water and or moved around by excavation or salvage. And they couldn't get that next piece to be able to list it. And then we see in March of 2000, Mobil Oil moves out and they want to have their dock pilings removed. So they hire a company called Stratomorph Geoexploration. And divers were sent in the water to monitor the removal of the pilings. And in doing so, the divers swam transects across the wreck site. They marked where they encountered what they felt to be wreck pieces because they couldn't see it. They were just, you know, groping the bottom. And they created sort of a stick map of where they thought the War Eagle and its remnants may be. In this dock removal process, the pilings were cut off about a foot above the river bottom and sort of left protruding from the War Eagle site on the bottom. So kind of surprisingly, we have like over 30 years of diver visitation and archaeological surveys, some excavation that's taken place on this site, but no one's been able to produce a map, like a clear map of what the place looks like. You know, divers are doing this from memory, from where they thought they swam to while feeling the bottom, and that's all we have. So we get to April of 2018 with this, you know, small pocket of money, and we hire a guy named Tom Crossmon from Hermantown, Minnesota. He has quite a bit of remote sensing equipment. So his whole thing is that he does body recoveries, like last effort body recoveries. So if you've lost a loved one and the public safety divers have not been able to locate them, you know, he'll go out and attempt to find it with this sort of expert tools and knowledge. And he's been quite successful at doing it. So we thought, well, you know, we know the shipwreck's there. We just have to see what it looks like and see what the feasibility of using some of this this equipment is in muddy, turbid, and flowing river water. And so that's what we did. We decided we were going to try to do this. We weren't going to do it really as an archaeological survey. If we got something, that was going to be great, but we wanted to test to see if it would work. You know, everybody else had failed, or, you know, gotten maybe a little bit of knowledge, and we maybe wanted to do that too. Well, we were very, very lucky. We did quite a bit. So this is, if you don't know where the War Eagle site is, I've kind of been describing it without showing you a map. This is what we're looking at. So this is like now Riverside Park. So you have the Black River and the Crosse River here. So it's upstream just a little bit from where, yeah, the proper town of La Crosse is in Riverside Park, with the nice drive-throughs and views are. But I think there's some hiking trails in there now. And so what we did to start out is we wanted to find the extent of where the wreckage was on the bottom. So when we started seeing items that were that we could contribute to either you know, the depot site, or you know, the barge Webb, which also sank, or the War Eagle, we wanted to be able to put dots in and kind of set the parameter for where our archaeological survey would be. So of course we didn't do this. We didn't dive. This is Lake Mendota, but this is what it would be like. Maybe even worse, not seeing your hand in front of your face. So we decided we were not going to dive unless we got equipment stuck on something. Instead we went out on a boat, and we started out by doing just a survey with a fish finder. So this is a Lowrance fish finder. We went up and down the river for a half a day in this location, trying to find how far up and how far down from the site of the Walkie Road Depot that we would find archaeological remnants from the shipwreck. So you can see here, this is Tom Crossmon on the right. This is Tori Kiefer, who was one of my coworkers and partner on the project. In fact, she did most of the archaeological research and actually most of the historical research as well. And you can see we have dots that are placed on here, a lot of dots. Showing where we're finding debris. And when we start seeing things sort of protrude from the bottom, we're marking them, and we're going to try to outline the extent of where we're seeing remnants of shipwreck. Once we did that, we put a towfish in. So this is a Marine Sonic 455 kilohertz sonar towfish. So we towed this then behind the boat and tried not to hit the shipwreck or anything that protruded up from the bottom, but to tow it as close to the wreckage as possible so that we could get a good view. I know this is hard to see because it's such a long shot, and this is actually 13 acres of river bottom that were surveyed, where we were finding debris from the shipwreck. So I'm going to kind of zoom in on certain areas, and we can take a look here. So we see sort of this this further north board. We don't know whether it does or does not is contributing to the site, but we wanted to include it just to make sure that that this may be, you know, what we would you know, as part of it, that it would be included. We also see that, and with the sonar data too, we're able to take measurements to within 1 centimeter accuracy. So that's also pretty helpful for us, because, you know, if you're going to put a diver on the bottom and they're going to take measurements and we're going to do, you know, a hand scaled drawing of what we see, we're going to have more than 1 centimeter inaccuracy. So, this worked out really well. We were unable to go in both directions. When we were towing the fish, we ended up with too much, I don't know, like a turbulence that was created when we were going upstream, but if we were going downstream, we were able to collect data. And so we mowed the lawn back and forth over this section. So we believe that in the center here, that this is the outline of where the barge Webb is. It matches the dimensions of what barges were in that time period. So we believe that that's what we're seeing there. We believe that this portion here that we're seeing, and you see the frames on the bottom, this is part of the superstructure that was on the War Eagle. And then as we go down to really the center here, you can see something that actually looks sort of ship shape here in the center. So it's got, you know, a pointy end. This we believe is the bow section. So remember that the fire, when it started, was amidship. So we believe that you know, some of the ship was protected, and then some of it may have burned more than others and floated or drifted a little bit more downstream. So we also, when we zoom in and look at this data, we were able to identify a paddle wheel fragment, the hub of the paddle wheel, and some spokes, sort of nubs that were there. So when this was cut free or hauled free, it may have broken away. And we can see, you know, we see frames here, we see stringers down the center. But what's really interesting is, remember, we were talking about those pilings that were put in to hold and count, sort of keep the dock in for the mobile oil company. You can see that they're right up through the center of the main bow section of the War Eagle. We can also see other dolphins, or those piling structures here, and then another one up towards the top of the screen. The reason that we know that these are the dolphins is that you can see there's a shadow that's projected behind it, and that shows sort of height up off the bottom. So what you're really looking at here are sound waves, and as those sound waves come through, they either hit you know, a soft bottom, and they won't project as much, or if they're hitting a hard surface like wood or metal, they'll have a really hard return, and we can read those. So you're reading and you're seeing now sound waves. So we have a couple features on here that are part of that mobile oil dock. We're not sure exactly what these are, but we see sort of a ground out area here. It's sort of a depression that's been made. And we believe that, you know, when tugs were pushing the barges up into this facility, that their propeller wash may have cleaned out some of this area here. And that's why we have this gouging that's happened as well. And we have a number of other things that we see, entanglements and small pieces and boxes and crates and things that show up in this debris field. A lot of those are explained further in the National Register nomination if you're so interested. Going a little bit further, we see the southernmost end of the debris field. And this we believe is the rest of the hull structure, so that this may have been the stern. And so as it's like falling apart and drifting down current, we see quite a bit of that debris, which is disseminated on the bottom down current. And that's really the extent of the picture of what the site looks like. So it's much better than the stick figures that we're seeing. I think there would be nothing really better than to maybe show, if we could create a cofferdam around this and drain all the water out and excavate. That may be the only other step left, or maybe there's another technology that will allow us to see through that muddy water that's coming in years to come. But so the next step then, after we collected this data and we could see stuff on the bottom, we could take some measurements, was, does this meet the criteria for the National Register? So we thought, well, heck, we still have might as well try it. We still have a little bit of time, and we should do something with this data anyway. We wrote up a National Register of Historic Places nomination form, and we turned it in. And this is the 75th shipwreck that the state of Wisconsin has now listed on the National Register. That is more than any other state. And we're pretty proud that this is the only river shipwreck that our state has, but the only river shipwreck that we know of that's been listed to the National Register. So it's pretty special and a pretty special place. And it not only tells this history of La Crosse, but really of sort of this Western migration and transportation of goods, when this was the edge of the Western frontier. So that's about what I have for you tonight, and I would like to open it up for questions. I think I can I'll turn on Peggy's microphone. I'll see if I can do that. So I should have practiced this, Peggy. There we go. I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you go.
Hey, I'm unmuted.
Yeah. So if
would you like me to read? You have a few already in the chat, and I am going to take advantage of my position to put my own first, which is actually a comment. I want everyone to know that the La Crosse County Historical Society has a large display of artifacts from the Steamboat, the War Eagle, at our museum in downtown La Crosse at 506 Main Street. Our artifacts were retrieved by a local diver in the 1970s named Dennis Brandt. He has family here. They can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe he is the person who recovered human remains and then returned them to the site. The Winona County Historical Society has their own collection of artifacts. Those are not with us at all. 85% of ours were retrieved by Dennis. Others have trickled in over the years, probably from that time in the 1930s when people were out there collecting souvenirs. And we actually have one elderly member of the Historical Society who has told us that he remembers visiting the site as a child and seeing the War Eagle sticking up out of the water. And now I'll read out your other questions. First of all, there was a question about your first slide. And do you know where the first image of the War Eagle that you showed, where that slide picture was taken?
No, I don't. I think it could probably be tracked down. And that might be a fun puzzle for someone to do, but I do not. So we got most of our images as either shared images from a number of collections. So yeah, all I know is what came with the photograph.
Right. Okay. Next question. This is one I would like to know the answer to as well. Why were steamboats called packets? And I know we have steamboat nerds in the audience, and they probably all know the answer to this.
Yeah. So they were for passenger and package service. So they were called packets. And they were used, you see this steam packet also as a terminology, not just on riverboats, but you also see passenger packet service. So that means that it would take supplies and service and crated goods, merchandise aboard. We see that also used on the Great Lakes quite a bit.
You showed a photo. No, I think the person is, it says in the first graphic or photo on the way to the train depot, the smokestacks are going in opposite directions. Was that a photo or an image from like an etching? I can't remember which image that was.
Let's see if I can go back.
And he also asked, did the boat Itasca shown in one photo have any damage? I'm not sure that Itasca was present at that time.
I don't recall it being present there. All right, I'm looking for it. I'm not seeing smokestacks going in two directions.
Yeah.
That one. Maybe
But
they can clarify that question.
Smoke in that one.
Which one? No smoke.
Oh, go back. It was the etching. It was,
okay.
I think that's artistic license is what I would call
too.
that.
Yeah. Or they're going really fast.
There you go. Super fast. Here's another question. Has there ever been a public search for photos or artifacts recovered from low water times? I have to say, in La Crosse, I don't think that has happened. They just went into private collections, and sometimes those things come to libraries or museums, and sometimes they stay in private collections. Another question, what is the water depth? Kind of depends on which year and which time of year.
Yeah, when we were out there, it was 15 feet deep.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, closer to shore, it was shallower, but out by the shipwreck site, about 15 feet deep.
And were all of the pilings cut off from the dock?
There were 3 pilings, and all of them were cut off about a foot or a little more than a foot above the bottom. So if there was wreckage, they were cut a little bit higher.
Okay. Was this War Eagle one of the boats in the 1854 Grand Excursion? Please say yes.
Yeah, okay.
Do we know if it was?
Bob's saying yes, so.
Here's another question. There is a double pointed object right next to the boat. Could that be the barge Webb? Because barges had kind of 2 front ends in a way. They were the same at both ends.
Hang on, I flip back down again. So I'm not sure what they're talking about. So we believe that that this is the barge Webb here. That's going to be your barge, and then we believe that. Let me go back up to the bigger picture because you can see more of it. And then we believe that the way that it happened is that the superstructure was pushed off. So we have that here. So it's probably loose and sticking above the water. They wanted to flatten that out. Then we believe that this is sort of the bottom bilge portion of the side of the hull, which has fallen away. And then the ship moved back down through the current, and we're seeing it here. And then as it's, you know, dynamited and moved around, that we see bits and pieces of really the burnt sections coming back down through the waterway.
Do we know why they named it the War Eagle?
It was a popular name. So, and the owners previously, the owners of the 1845 War Eagle sold their ship, and then it was dismantled into a barge, and then they built another one and named it War Eagle. So it's the same owners, same captain. So I think they just like the name.
Several photos indicate that the War Eagle had sets of what are called grasshoppering spars. Why were these needed on the upper Mississippi, or were these basically loading derricks?
I was assuming they were loading derricks. So Bob's saying no, but you know.
How does the addition to the National Register help preserve the shipwreck?
Okay, so protection of wreck sites is always a layering of laws. So the addition of the site and marking it as an archaeological site, marking it as a burial site, enacts certain laws at the state level. National Register nominations give it a federal layer of protection. So if people would go out and loot or damage, or if they would want to do dredging and dump it on top of the site, we could protect it so that the site would be available and protected for generations to come to study. You know, you never know what the technology is going to do and change, and what more we can learn as technology improves in years to come.
Right. Can you tell what parts of the ship beyond the hull itself are still existing?
We can see down to the construction features. So we're able to tell in, you know, by looking at this mosaic and measure the features on what the stringers were, what the spacing was between them, room and space of that, how they laid down the floors, where they put additional floors in to support machinery. You know, we're only able to see what's available. So this is,
but
there's
those
different levels.
and
Yeah, there's different levels of archaeology, right? There's phase 1, which is non-invasive, and that's what this is. Phase 2 is going to be document in place, and it's going to be, you know, a little bit more hands-on, and then you would have phase 3, which is excavation. So we're looking at a phase 1 archaeological survey. So there's lots more to learn, but we have learned more than we knew before, and so we're making progress.
do you know the technique for the hydrographic survey? Did they use a single beam sub-bottom profiler?
You're talking about the hydrographic survey that was conducted in 85. I believe that they said what it was in their determination of eligibility. So we could pull that and look at it if you wanted to. That's available through the National Park Service's website. So if people want to look at it, they can go to National Register of Historic Places and pull the form. You know, give all kinds of details.
Here's a question that goes back to something you talked about at the beginning. did the War Eagle transport the first Minnesota to Fort Snelling for training in 1861?
They from Fort Snelling. Yes.
I think that's what the person meant. Yeah. It did transport?
Yes, it did. That is this War Eagle. And that is the extent of its Civil War service or contribution.
Someone makes a comment that there's another steamboat wreck in Minnesota that's been submitted to the National Register as well.
Okay.
Is it called the Andy Gibson?
No.
There's a link in your chat to this report.
Okay.
For anybody who's interested.
Okay.
I'm seeing some people thanking you. Somebody else says the War Eagle was named after Old Abe, an eagle captured by an Ojibwe tribal member named Sky in 1861 and given to the 8th Wisconsin Regiment and that accompanied them throughout the Civil War. I've heard that story.
Yeah. You know, that's I mean, this was built in 54. So
Right.
before that story. So, but I think it's all tied together.
Mhm. Well, it might have been part of why they wanted an eagle for their mascot, because War Eagles were a thing already. Here's an interesting question. Were there injuries on shore from the fire?
I don't know much about that. I haven't researched a lot about Milwaukee Road Depot. The extent of my research was really just the shipwreck site itself in order to write the nomination. But I do believe that there were some injuries on shore, but I don't know the extent of those. I can't comment on that.
Bob Taunt is telling us that one fireman was injured. And Bob Mullen is telling us that grasshoppering spars were often used to assist lifting a boat to get through the frequent shallows and sandbars on the upper Mississippi. So they were kind of like arms that the boat could lift itself up and walk through the river. Very interesting. That's it for questions. If anyone else has something they want to add, do it right now. Otherwise, we are going to thank Tamara very much. I think this was great. And don't forget, if you're in town in La Crosse, you can come to the Historical Society and see artifacts from the War Eagle.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're very grateful you're here. Okay. Good night, all.